Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. My name is Randall Richmond, and I'm the Director of Athletics here at Kent State University and a proud graduate of the NCAA Charles Wickham Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute helped me refine who I was as a man well before focusing on who I was as an administrator. Within the program, I developed lifelong friendships, colleagues, and confidants to help me discover my true purpose in this profession, which is to be a transformational leader that has a positive impact on people's lives well beyond sports. And as the great orator Big Sean often says, the energy you give is what you manifest. Peace.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, and review 1Q wherever you listen to podcasts. Our guest today is Liz Reyes. Liz is the Assistant Athletics Director for the Illini Way and Student Athlete Development here at University of Illinois. Liz, thanks for having me here on campus. I am happy to talk to you today.
Thank you for your time, for coming out to visit.
Yes, ma'am. So now looking at your background, you've been in the position here at Illinois for almost a year, most of that time virtually though, right? Which is an interesting situation in itself. You spent some time at Washington, at Baylor and Arkansas, and quick stint at the Cleveland Browns. You've been in the college athletics industry for almost 15 years, which includes working for Student Athlete Academic Services while you were an undergrad. So you do have a wealth of experience actually being in the industry. First, I want you to give me a little insight on starting a job during the pandemic, getting to know your colleagues and student athletes virtually, right, in terms of in the position you're in here at Illinois.
Oh, that's a great question. Starting a new position in the virtual space, just like many others could assume, I absolutely was not a fan of. I'm completely an extrovert. I would even tab myself as a social butterfly. And to have to be restricted in a new space where everything is shut down and closed, and I have to work the long college athletics hours that we do work, 12, 14, 16 hours a day by myself in an apartment where I don't know anyone or have ever met the person who's staring at me on the other end of the screen.
Yeah.
It was not the most enjoyable. I will be completely honest, it was tough. About month number 7, month number 8, I will say that it started to take a toll on me just because I wanted to produce the same level of quality relationships. And the fact that we were virtual was prohibiting me, from doing that. And so trying to look at my situation as the cup is half full, this is the setting, Liz, it's not going to change. So I tried to change my mindset into, while I am having these meetings, with different units or with student athletes, how can I maximize the time to get to know the person, whether it was a staff member or student athlete? I was super, super intentional with that, with having the small talk, but what you would call the water cooler conversations, like, hey, how was your weekend? Or like, what do you enjoy doing here in Champaign? And when you stop by, you mentioned you have kids. Like, what do your kids like to do? Like, is there your favorite trampoline park in town? Because I would actually go as an adult. I kind of enjoy that kind of stuff, being, former gymnast and cheer background. But so I try to maximize my time to get to know people for their full self, and not just, we're here to talk about Summer Bridge, or we're here to talk about our end of the year banquet event. Are there opportunities before or after our conversation to have that small talk and create those opportunities where I can meet people for who they are, for their full selves. And once I changed my mindset to that, it eased things a lot more. But like I said, it was tough. But that's kind of the perspective that I took, is if I was having this conversation with them in person, what would I do? Would I have small talk? I'd try to get to know them. So I took the same approach that I would in person and tried to transfer it to a virtual space.
And were your colleagues, when you tried to have, I guess initially it might have felt a little forced, but when you tried to have those water cooler conversations virtually, Were they open to it? Did they understand what we're doing here? We're actually trying to build these relationships with the new person on staff here.
Yeah, no, they were open, and I'm so thankful that they were open to having side conversations with me, because I think those small conversations that are in passing, that are, sometimes deemed to be non-significant, they actually are, because they affect the full student athlete, or they affect the full staff member and how they're showing up to work, whether that's on Zoom or now that we're lucky, in person. I think that they could tell that the small talk conversations were with good intent, just for me to get to know them, their perspective, or for me to get to know the community that I now live in, that I've never stepped in because everything's shut down. They were open to it. I'm very thankful for that. Very welcoming. They knew my intent behind it.
Right.
So yeah.
Thinking about what you mentioned when you have to get to know people. Now, young people and then student athletes specifically are interesting, because in terms of relationships and trust and allowing someone to be influential in your life, they really have to know you and trust you for them to believe what you're telling them. I mean, there had to be some challenges in that when you talk about if you had to meet with student athletes one-on-one or as a group or anything like that. You want to go into any specifics about that, specifically with student athletes and building that dynamic of being in the role you're in, but then, expecting student athletes to listen and participate in whatever you were trying to create.
Yeah, that's a huge, that was a huge focus, and still continues to be a huge focus for myself and for our staff here in student athlete development. We're a team of 3, and 2 of the 3 of us were hired during COVID. But I took the same approach as I mentioned just a second ago with staff. I did the same thing with student athletes, and I tried to show my personality and show my true, sincere level of care for the student athletes when I was meeting with them. So I can give you an example. So one of our big initiatives was this last year was to have a career appointment with every single student athlete amongst our 3 staff members. And I was intentional with our staff, letting them know that this is a perfect opportunity where you're going to be in front of one student athlete one-on-one. It is over Zoom, but let's try to take this time to get to know them. Background information, like where are you from? What do you enjoy doing? What do you not enjoy doing? Like, what are your interests? If time wasn't an issue, money wasn't an issue, like what are your craziest dreams and goals? Well, following up with that, could we take any step towards that? And so getting to know their background was super, super important as we started the conversations and started to build these relationships. And then aside from that, following up was going to be huge in us building these relationships. So them getting to know that, yes, it was a mandatory meeting with our office, talk about career, and some of them, have it all figured out, quote unquote. And some of them, of course,
having the slightest idea.
Yeah, right. It was just good for us to take time to just get to know them and recirculate back on our office on what our core pillar areas are. Some of them, we had the whole range. Some of them had heard about our office their freshman year. They may be juniors now, and now there's new faces. Or some of them may be seniors, had an interest that initially when they first got here, and they just, got busy, life happened, their student athlete schedules are demanding. So it was kind of neat to see us talk about our office again, build newly found relationships that had some sort of structure and basis of focusing on their whole self, and then us moving forward and following up with the conversations based on what they shared with us. And it was, even in one semester, I'm going to use football as an example too. We had some football student athletes that got connected through our office through those meetings. And then they started volunteering in our office through virtual community outreach events. And then one person didn't get back to me one time about volunteering for something, which is fine. They probably got busy. And then we do like a social media release, and they're like, wait, I wasn't invited. Like, was I invited? I'm like, yes, I did. You didn't hit me back. And so it's kind of cool to see that the buy-in in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I'm thinking about where you've been in terms of when you were an undergrad at Washington, your time at Baylor, at Arkansas, even the Cleveland Browns. You worked with a number of leaders, right? And I tend to ask people when they've been in the industry 5 to 10 years, 15 in your case, your leadership philosophy. What is your leadership philosophy? Have you formulated, or are you formulating a leadership philosophy as you continue to grow in your career?
Yeah, I would say I'm kind of in the middle of that. If I were to look at myself here, like just even in our organizational chart as an athletic department, I'm kind of, I would say, like about the middle level management here. And so I'm kind of excited for the future to continue growing and continue leading people and serving people. But if I had to answer about my leadership philosophy as it is developed now, I would say the most important thing is caring for the full person. And I take that seriously, whether that's, meeting with my student athletes or meeting with staff. It's super important to know where that person is coming from, what their background is, because every time they answer you or every time they show up, it's going to be through that lens that they carry because the background affected, where they currently are presently. So, it's important to know what's important to them, what are challenges to them. And then on the other extreme, what are they most interested in? Like, what is their target? What is their end game? And that could be in the industry or out of the industry, or that could be in sport or out of sport if it's a student athlete. But just caring for them and really listening, I think that's the most important foundational thing, really, really listening to them. And after you listen and you hear where they're coming from, it becomes a lot easier to build trust. I think that's another big piece, is the trusting piece. Being able to have all those conversations and the communication of who they are and learning where they're coming from and, showing up as the same person, like all these little things amount to building trust. And along the way, it's not going to be a very smooth rainbows and daisies, super smooth journey together. I understand that. But in those moments of conflict too, is where trust is built. How did you communicate? How did you work with that person to get over that issue, to get through? And so I think that's a huge piece there. And also kind of sharing about your standards and expectations, kind of, how you're going to deliver your work and how you're going to show up every day. I think that also influences those that are following or those that are looking up to you, whether they're a student athlete or a staff member. They're going to see your work, how you communicate, how you deliver your work, the quality of it, the way that you manage the work throughout that process. I think that's huge. Just having high expectations for the quality of work that you have. I think that's what drives a lot of winning teams to the top. And last, this kind of circulates back to the caring for the full person, understanding the full person. I think it's important also to just know who you're working with, knowing what their end game is and what they're trying to do, and knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are. Like if they're trying to aim for this certain target, what are the areas that they're weak in that you can help them strengthen? Or what are the areas that they're really strong in that you want to, talk about and speak on, say, hey, you do this very well. Please continue to do that. That's going to help you in your future. So kind of understanding what the strengths and weaknesses are and what that end game is so that you can be a part of that journey and help them with that.
Right. So when you talk about caring about the whole person, trust amongst the people, and then executing at a high level in terms of leadership philosophy, trust is the one that involves other people, right? Care and operating at a high level seem to be internal things in terms of how you lead yourself and hope other people will lead in terms of the organization you are involved in. Thinking about care, is there a way to instill that in others? There's obviously a way for you to model it when you're with student athletes, with your colleagues, with people around you who you know and who you work with, who you love, be personal or professional. But is there a way to teach that? Can you teach somebody to care about someone's whole person, about them on the field, off the field, in work, out of work, with their family, that kind of thing?
I think the best way to teach that is to be an example of it. Okay. So I think my staff has seen me in how I interact with staff and how I interact with student athletes. And I think they've noticed that my conversations aren't just about, you need to get this resume done. They're not just about, have you sent me the dates that I need to put on the calendar? There's so much beyond that. So I think leading by example is huge. And I think also strategically positioning yourself to be able to have a voice in the room and build credibility and build trust. And when you strategically put yourself in the rooms that allow for that, you also expose yourself to opportunities. So, I would say my oversight does this, and I do this too, and this is not groundbreaking, but if I'm given a task or if I give a task, I'm hoping that it will be executed well at a high level. And if it is, then we gain some ground there. We took a step forward in the direction of trust. However, if it's not, then we need to have a conversation. Either, my oversight will have a conversation with me like, oh, actually, I wanted it this way, or let's not forget to add in this. Please add this in. So I can have the same conversation with one of my staff members. And it's not that trust is lost, but it's just that we're learning about each other's and the expectations and the style and the preferences. But I think that also kind of helps build trust when you strategically put yourself in the right rooms and the right positions, you use your voice well for those opportunities. That could help you move in the direction of building trust.
So it sounds like there's an aspect of accountability, an aspect of, so I had an old boss. Grant Taft was an old football coach, executive director of the American Football Coaches Association. And he hired me as an intern. And then when he hired me as a full-time, he was like, Ty, you're an education guy. I'm an education guy. I care about it. I want you to care about it. Go be great, right? And that was the job description. The expectations, I didn't know what the whole role was, anything. It was just, education is important to me as your leader, so I wanted to be important to you. Go make it great. And so that was interesting to me. And as I've grown since then, I realized that, what's important is actually spelling out what you expect of people. One thing you just mentioned was, you may correct them a little after they've presented their work to you, which is important, right? Coach before you criticize. But I wonder about establishing those expectations on the front end in terms of, here's what you can expect from me. Now we have accountability, right? And then also them saying, well, here's what you can expect from me too, as your staff, right? And then now we know what to expect from each other. So if we deliver on that, I know that you're accountable for what you say. So now that just slowly but surely we start establishing that trust. And I know that you care about the work you're doing. I care about the work I'm doing. And I care about you. This is why I'm willing to correct the work you're doing afterwards, because it's bigger than what you're doing here in Illinois. It might go further along in your career. I think that's very interesting. When you talk about trust, given all I just said, what do you see in someone you worked with for less than a year to where you know that there's trust in the environment, organizational trust amongst colleagues? Mm-hmm.
I would say, I would say that when we're having a conversation together, what they share, the language they use, the deliverables they have, their actions have our office in mind. Like they're considerate either of our time or considerate of our capabilities, or here's a buzzword, considerate of our bandwidth. They may approach us with an ask and be upfront and say, I know you only have 3 staff members and you're probably booked for programs this fall, but this is a hot item that just came through our executive team that we think should be housed in your shop, but then sharing that they're mindful of our bandwidth and our time and our calendar. Like those are things that I think are nice to hear, that I'm like, okay, they're being upfront. They know where I'm sitting, what my seat feels like, and they're going to come with this ask, but they know what's going on here. That's not just saying like, oh, well, here's a program. Can you guys just please do it?
Yeah, which has happened in the past.
Yeah. Student athlete development, that's in general, not Illinois, across the board, I would say, is an office where a lot of things, interesting things are asked could get, quote, dumped on. And it's, yeah. So
it happens, right? But in terms of what you're saying, one small modicum of trust can be or is understanding the workload I have, but bringing me more work, but doing it in a way where I understand there's a load on your table, but this is very important. And even just using those words is enough for me to know that you understand what I'm doing and those type of things. Yeah, trust is important, and it's built. It's almost like confidence, right? Small victories.
Yeah. Oh,
small
that's
victories build
huge.
confidence. Small victories build trust. You know what I mean?
Oh,
So
100%. I like that. I'm gonna steal that.
that's all right. We're still working on this leadership development, right? This leadership philosophy. She said standard of excellence, right? Doing things at a high level, right? At a high level is a term used for a long time.
Yes.
And that is really initially a way of leading yourself, right? But then there's also the aspect of you start having staff and people working for you. You start having organizational staff. Now I have a couple layers of people that report to me, right, as you progress in your career. And I've always said this, learned it from Nick Saban, is that overachievers don't like working with mediocre people, and mediocre people don't like working with overachievers, right? Exactly.
Cringe. Yes.
But the staff, sometimes there may be people who either don't know what it means to overachieve, don't know what it means to work at a high level, and you may have to be the one to show them the way. So talk about that aspect of when you get beyond leading yourself at a high level, when you get beyond your own standards of excellence to now you're in a leadership position, so your staff has to operate at that. There's obviously going to be a lead by example method, but then sometimes you got to sit down and teach people how to do it. Tell me about that aspect.
Yeah, I think breaking down and having conversations of why it matters to operate at a high level, I think putting things into context like that matters. So we can be working on a very small internal project, let's say something that's going to be on a Word document or on a graphic just for us to use. But you never know when my oversight may ask for that document. And my oversight is an executive. He has touch points with the AD, who has touch points on campus with different committees and leaders on campus. So I think breaking down that no matter how minute the task may be, it matters to do it at a high level and do it well, because we don't know the future of that document and whose hands it's going to land in. In addition, that document could also be a part of their own professional profile. Can they take this document and later on reference it to do something even greater while they're here with us or beyond? Or can they either maybe reference it to expand on a project that they may be involved in down the road themselves? Is it something that they can put in a portfolio when they're interviewing for a job, breaking down whatever the project was? But if you have a mediocre document, that's not going to be something that you want in our AD's hands, or that you're going to want to present to somebody else as you're interviewing for a job. So I think those two things, breaking down why it matters to operate with excellence, the repercussions of that if it's not done well, the future of that, it could go very well. If you knock this project out of the ballpark, or if you do this document very well, hey, there may be some interest in putting this elsewhere. And that's happened in our office already in the last 11 months. We put something very simple, clean, concise, and clear, and it gets to a committee on campus. And then the second piece is, like I mentioned, sharing that this is for their own professional gain, their own professional growth. So it's kind of how I approach that.
Yeah, I think that's excellent what you just said. And it goes back to those incremental things, right? Which we said with care and which we said with trust, is you start breaking down why it is important for this, whatever project you're working on, to be at a high level, right? And you do that enough with people, it becomes a habit. And once it's a habit, then you start going down the path of this is becoming a part of your livelihood. So I like that. I like that the incremental approach of everything takes small steps to get to what you're trying to accomplish as a leader. You've worked with a number of people. You've been mentored by a number of people. You've been through a number of different programs. I wonder if you were to say that you've taken a couple things from couple different people, A, and then B, you think about being an undergrad working in student athlete academic services and looking back to the people who were leaders at that point in your career, and then the role you're growing into now in terms of being a leader in college athletics. do you see how and why some of the things they did back then, why they did it now that you are coming into a role which may be similar to the roles they were in?
Yeah, no, definitely. I don't have any regrets. Of course, for everyone in their journey coming up in athletics, it's not the most glamorous journey, not the most
We were all
easy,
interns and
right?
graduate
Of course,
assistants,
we
and
all
we all
know
done it.
the
Yeah,
burning sands we had to cross to get
exactly.
here. But I am not regretful, because it is those burning sands and the practices that were utilized, whether good or bad, that allowed me to get here. But I try as best I can, I'm not always the best at it, but I try to put myself in their shoes. Even like today, when I get asked for a task, again, no matter how big or small, I try to put myself in their shoes, because if they're asking for something, or if they need my support, it's probably for a larger cause. And it's going to, if I'm being asked to do something, more likely not, it's important. And I'm being asked for a reason. So even when I was an intern, oh my gosh, I was a deer in headlights. I don't know what I was doing, but whatever task was given to me, I'm like, they need it, I'm going to give it to them as best as I can, as best as possible. I don't know why they would need 200 copies of this, but I'm going to staple them. If I have to do it myself manually, I'm going to staple them the right way in the same corner and make sure they're stacked nicely and put them exactly where they want, how they want them. And at the time, all those little details. Again, we're talking about details here, but those little details are what separate you. Those little details are what allow you more opportunities to build trust and all that. But no, I do see myself a lot. I'm like, oh, this reminds me of a time when, and I was being asked X, Y, Z, and I do see it. I actually even see it in our staff. Like when I'm giving an ask for something for a project, and I'm like, you know what? They're probably wondering why. Let me explain why the ask is, or, let me explain the repercussions of this, or let me explain the future of where this ask could go. So yeah, definitely a lot of moments. And I will also come back and reiterate those. Not all the moments are glamorous, but there is a rhyme and reason behind it. So yeah, I have a lot of aha moments.
I see.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because I know when I was younger, I didn't get the why. It was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
do these things and make it happen.
Yeah.
I probably could have asked.
Yeah.
I didn't know to ask back then, right?
Yeah, I don't think I did. I don't think I did either.
That's interesting. So I want to be able to rehash this to you, and you tell me if I'm wrong, or if we are talking, if we're in the same chapter but not on the same page, or if we're on actually the same page.
Okay.
You mentioned, so first is caring for the full person, where they come from and where they are. And you do that by listening, right? Listening and being responsive to what people are telling you, to what they come from and how they show up. And you build trust, which is the second point, based on that listening, which affects caring, right? Which impacts caring, right? So you care for them, you build trust with them, and then you said one of the major keys is having and sharing expectations for yourself and those around you, and really the organization as a whole, right? Did I get that right?
Yes.
And then finally, understanding where people want to go, understanding in terms of strengths and weaknesses, or future, or whatever it is, understanding where they want to go. Did I get those right?
Excellent. A+, 4.0.
Excellent. Well, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you allowing me to visit you in your office here at University of Illinois.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. That was Liz Reyes. She is the Assistant Athletics Director for the Illini Way and Student Athlete Development here at University of Illinois. And of course, this is Ty Brown with one question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today.
This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.